I would suspect very high. You know, just, I know it's retrospective and probably doesn't count for very much, but just even before I left, I could spot other victims, people who were being abused within the organization. And I know when I was about 13, there was a young girl in the congregation, and I just knew her father was sexually abusing her. Her father was an elder. And I've since learned that I do have an ability to spot other abuse survivors. And I'm dead on, I'd say 99.9% of the time. And later on, it actually came out in the newspapers that she had. It was a big thing out in Canada that this girl had been abused by her father, an elder, while he was an elder in the congregation. And I was like 13 years old. I spotted her. I knew that she was being abused. So I would say that statistics are, despite the denials of the organization that abuse doesn't exist within the organization, I'd say it's probably rampant because, you know, who do you go to if you're, you know, it's an old boys gang, even, you know, within the congregations. They're only going to report what doesn't reflect badly on the organization. Let's face it, an elder is, or any brother in the congregation is abusing his family, it's not going to appear too great if it hits the media. So, and even when I went for counseling, I was told very clearly, don't let them know you're a witness. And yet that's a key element of what was going on in my life. Because if I, you know, as long as they want to portray this idea that there are no problems in the organization, then going for help and telling people you're a witness is a great big signal that, well, wait a minute, there are problems with witnesses. I've also done work counseling people who are witnesses, and they knew I was an ex-member, but they didn't know where else to go for help and understanding and what they were dealing with. And you know, I guess they figured that I was safe to tell because, you know, as a therapist, I'm under, you know, confidentiality rules. And there are a lot more problems in the organization because of the code of silence that exists and the authoritarian way of structure. That, you know, what the top guys say goes. And a lot of fear of going against that.
You're kept in a place where there are biblical justifications, you might say. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Biblical justifications and this whole idea that the organization equals God. And it doesn't. Even though they say it doesn't, the implication is there that they are God's only representative on earth. So if you want to get to God, you've got to go through them. And so therefore they have the power. That's pretty powerful. Jesus even said that, you know, when he was, you know, telling the scribes and Pharisees what he thought of them. The same thing applies to the witnesses. In fact, when I read that the first time, I think it's Matthew 23, and yet generally the witnesses use that to apply to every other religion. When you take a look at that and apply it to the witnesses themselves, it is truly shocking how similar. How, like, they everything. It's just unbelievable that they do the exact same things that they condemn everybody else for. But then that's typical of all cults. Well, they'll say, what you can wear. Okay, women cannot wear skirts, you know, an inch above their knee. Well, it's a guiding principle, and you're not going to be disfellowshipped for it. But you're going to be talked to. It's like, wait a minute, is it a principle or is it a rule? If it's a principle, then people should be free to do what they want, to obey the principle or not. If it's a rule, somebody's going to talk to you if you break it. And those kinds of playing with words, it's not a rule, it's a principle, is what gets people caught up a lot, because it's like, well, no, they don't have rules. Well, no, because they've redefined what principle means. And again, that comes back to the mind control techniques, where if I can change the meaning of a word, then and make it mean something that it doesn't mean, but still apply what I want it to mean, like principle, for example, then I can control, and principle doesn't mean you're going to be punished. You have free will, but you don't have free will because we'll nail you if you break it. As long as they continue to say, but we don't tell people what to do, then they can absolve themselves of responsibility when people actually break the rules. But they can, by calling it a principle, they can still exert the control without having the responsibility. And therefore they put the responsibility on the individual, but they have the control over them. And it's very subtle, but it's extremely strong. And very few people see. In fact, I don't think any witness actually sees it. Something you asked me earlier was, is this, do people know that they're doing this? Are they aware of the amount of control that they're exerting on people? And I started by saying that the organization had been founded by some really dysfunctional men. And I think that it's been set up in a way by the dysfunction that it kind of perpetuates itself. That the people who are involved now, I think they're so controlled and it's so ingrained in them that they haven't got a clue. And that's similar to you raise up a child in an abusive home and they think that's normal and that's the right way to raise children. They grow up and they beat their kids and because they think that's normal. And I think that's what's happened in the organization. A couple of people, the founders were dysfunctional. They implant or set up this system and it has just taken on a life of its own and everybody in it thinks it's normal. And when somebody comes along and says, hey, wait a minute, there's something wrong here, they wind up, well, excuse me, this is what's normal, we're sticking with it, and goodbye, which is exactly what has happened to a few board members who are able to see the dysfunction in it. I think in any group where there are a lot of rules about what you can and can't do, life becomes a matter of assessing, going through the rules all the time to assess whether what you can do is right or wrong. And you wind up not being able to think clearly for yourself and judge, whether the rule itself is right or wrong, or whether you should obey it or not, but rather that just becomes this like rote going through the motions. The effect of this for a lot of people is that they stop thinking, and it's just a matter of, okay, what do the elders say? You have to make a choice about doing something, and I think I need to ask somebody. And a perfect example of this is when my oldest daughter got married. She had left the witnesses. She chose to get married in a Catholic church. And she wanted her father, who's still a witness, to walk her down the aisle. Normally this would not be allowed because it would be considered participating in false religion. And he could not say yes or no by himself. He could not critically think about what he wanted to do, what the rules were. He had to go and ask the elders what he should do in this situation. And most people would just make a choice. And he didn't do that. He went to ask the elders, and I don't know what happened at the meeting, but the justification was that he could do it, but he was just making a delivery. So so basically what he was going to do, just as if he was the bread man, he was going to make a delivery to a convent, or the church. He was basically just delivering his daughter to her new husband down the aisle. So he actually did walk her down the aisle, and deliver her to her new husband, and then he went and he sat at the back of the church and didn't participate in the religious activity. But something as simple as walking somebody down the aisle, he could not figure that out on his own. He had to ask permission, or under what circumstances can I rationalize participating in this function. And a lot of people in cults are reduced to that kind of living by the law rather than being able to think for themselves. And hey, we're thinking human beings. We should be able to see a problem and work it through. And after years of being in a cult, it becomes very difficult for people to actually critically think and assess. And one of the things that happened to me after I came out, shortly after I was disfellowshipped, there was an article in The Awake on child abuse and how the elders should deal with it, and if you had been abused, what to do about it. And when you read through it, it sounds good when you just kind of quickly read through, but there are pieces missing. There was also another article on whether Jehovah's Witnesses were a cult. Now, anybody who, would read it, you would realize that they never answer the question. So they put the question out there, are Jehovah's Witnesses a cult? You read the article, not once do they say, no, we're not a cult. They say, this is what other people think are cults, which is generally they take you off to a commune and brainwash you. They don't let you eat. You're not allowed to talk to anybody. And they say, we don't do that. But nowhere in the article do they really define what a cult is and say, we don't do these things. And if you have the ability still to critically analyze something, you would be able to see that. But once that ability is taken away through the mind control techniques, you read it and it's a blur. You don't read between the lines, because in any of their magazines or their literature, there is more not said than needs to be said. And it's that critical thinking ability that allows people to say, what are they not saying? And that's been taken away. And I know when I came out, going back to school was really difficult, because I had to learn how to critique as I was reading, and to say, well, one of the courses I took was on research, and how do you evaluate the information you get and whether it's correct or not. And very little of the information in the Watchtower or any of the literature is actually correct. I think for people who have come out of any cult, and it's important to find other people who have been in. One idea I really like is to find somebody who's been in a different cult and compare notes. And you'll begin to see, wait a minute, there's an awful lot of similarities here. And the reason for that is that if you go to somebody first from your own cult, that programming to defend them is so strong that whatever they say, you kind of, it gets canceled out. So when you talk to somebody from a different cult and you see the beliefs are the same, the structure is the same, their feelings are the same, you begin to equate that there's something more here. From talking to somebody outside of the group, from a different cult, then move into somebody who has been from the same group and start comparing notes and talking. Read as much as you can get your hands on. And find support groups if there are any. If not, try starting one. A lot of them are popping up all over the place. And then I think it's really important for people to get counseling. And sadly, it's really hard to find. Very, very few people understand the dynamics of abuse, never mind the dynamics of spiritual abuse. And it might basically have to interview therapists and find out if they've read certain books, if they understand abuse dynamics. That would help. If you talk to a minister and he understands abuse dynamics, he might be able to key into this. Ideally, find somebody who's been through cult experience and understands the coming out process. But they might be hard to find. I think we need a lot more research and training to help therapists understand the dynamics of this abuse. There are some fabulous books out there that people can get hold of, and the internet is a gold mine. Get on the internet and do your research. There's people out there. There's information galore. And failing that, go to your library and look for information on cults.